The champagne was tepid and reeked of cheap yeast sediment, despite the French label slapped on the bottle. I stood in the corner of the Williamsburg loft, clutching my glass like a shield against the room, studying the brickwork. The loft was cavernous, boasting trendy, industrial floor-to-ceiling windows through which Manhattan glittered. The rent for this place was $4,500 a month. I knew this for a fact, because the check had cleared from my account 3 days ago, but not a single soul in the room knew that. To the 100 or so guests gathered here, this was Julian's creative studio. Julian, my son. Quiet, please. Julian tapped a fork against his glass. The sound was thin, pitiful, but the crowd obediently hushed. He was 32. He wore trousers so tapered they exposed his ankles, and a blazer that cost more than my first car. His beard was barbershop perfect, and his eyes shone with that feverish energy people in 2015 called hype, but which I simply called desperation. Thank you all for coming to the launch of my new blog, The Success Narrative, Julian began, spreading his arms like a hipster messiah. Today we're talking about personal branding, about the importance of declaring yourself to the world. The crowd murmured approval. I took a sip of the warm wine. It was sour. You know, Julian's voice dropped, becoming intimate. He had switched on the authenticity mode his followers loved so much. I often think about fear, the fear of being seen. My father, Bill, is standing right over there in the corner. Dad, give us a wave. Every head turned toward me. I didn't wave. I simply raised my glass slightly, maintaining the expression of polite interest I had honed over decades. My father is a writer, Julian continued with a sad, pitying smile. He's been writing something his whole life, sits in his study, typing away. But do you know what he's published in 40 years? No thing. An awkward silence hung in the air. Someone coughed. A young girl with pink hair standing next to me averted her eyes as if she were looking at a cripple. He writes for the drawer. Julian paused, savoring the moment. It's a tragedy, friends. A tragedy of talent suffocated by perfectionism and the fear of criticism. He taught me the most important lesson. If you aren't building your brand, you don't exist. You are a ghost. Don't be like Bill. Be loud. The laughter was nervous, but it was there. They laughed to support their host. Julian beamed. He had just sold his own father's humiliation for the currency of social validation. I felt something tighten inside me. Not resentment. That muscle had atrophied long ago. It was a cold, clinical observation. I looked at my son and didn't see a successful influencer. I saw a small boy breaking other children's toys because he didn't know how to build his own. To courage, Julian proclaimed. To courage, the crowd echoed. I placed my full glass on the nearest table, carefully so as not to leave a ring on the lacquered surface, and walked out. Julian didn't even notice I was gone. He was too busy taking a selfie with a group of girls who would likely forget his name by morning. The taxi got me to my home in Connecticut in an hour and a half. It was quiet here, no industrial lofts, no noise of Brooklyn parties, just the old oak tree by the porch and the smell of cooling autumn earth. I entered the house, hung up my old tweed coat, and walked into my study. This was the room Julian despised. The dusty crypt, he called it. Floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books, a heavy oak desk, a leather armchair worn down by years of work. I walked to one of the shelves, pushed aside a row of reference books on Victorian England, and pressed a hidden panel. The door clicked and swung open. There they were, my real children, 23 novels, 23 international bestsellers. The covers did not bear the name Bill Evans. Embossed in gold leaf was the name. Victoria Vale. The world knew Victoria Vale as the queen of the psychological thriller and historical drama. Her books were translated into 40 languages. Her royalties allowed me to maintain this house, pay for Julian's tuition at a prestigious but useless arts college, cover his credit card debts, and pay the rent on the very loft where he had just humiliated me. I wasn't a failure writing for the drawer. I was an industry. I was an invisible man pulling the strings of readers' emotions across the globe. Why the pseudonym? In the early 70s, publishers told me women wouldn't buy sentimental novels written by a bearded man. I agreed to the game, and then the game became too profitable to stop. Victoria Vale was an enigma. She never gave interviews, never appeared in public. The publishing house created a legend of a recluse living somewhere in the Scottish Highlands. But I lived here, listening to my son call me a coward. I sat in my armchair and exhaled. The anger was fading, replaced by a familiar weariness. Today, I was supposed to finish the proofreading, my final novel, The Confession of Silence. It wasn't just a book, it was my magnum opus. For the first time in years, I had decided to step away from genre cliches. It was a brutal, honest story about generational betrayal, a book that was destined to win a Pulitzer, even if they had to award it to a non-existent woman. I reached for the bottom drawer of the desk where I kept the only printed copy of the manuscript. I never trusted clouds or servers when it came to final edits. Only paper. Only a red pen. The drawer slid out smoothly and my heart skipped a beat. The folder was empty. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light. Senile absent-mindedness. I pulled the drawer out completely, dumped the contents onto the floor, paper clips, old drafts, notepads. But the blue folder with 300 pages of text was not there. A chill ran down my spine, not the pleasant chill of inspiration, but the icy terror of loss. I remembered yesterday, Julian had stopped by to check on the old man. In reality, he needed money for the catering for tonight's party. I wrote him a check. He wandered around the study while I looked for my checkbook in the other room. He complained that he had creative constipation. The publishers were demanding a book from him, and all he had was a title and a pretty cover on Instagram. "It's so vintage in here, Dad," he had said, trailing his finger along my desk. He stole it. My son stole my work. I sat staring at the empty drawer, feeling reality tearing at the seams. He couldn't have. He was lazy. He was shallow. But he wasn't a thief. Or did I know him that poorly? The phone on the desk came to life, shattering the silence with a harsh ring. The display read, "Julian." I stared at the phone for 10 seconds before pressing accept. "Dad? You home already?" Julian's voice sounded wired, almost hysterical. Party music thumped in the background. "Listen, I was probably a bit harsh today. Sorry, okay? It's all for the show. You get it. Marketing." "I get it, Julian." My voice was even. Too even. "Great. Listen, I've had a breakthrough." He laughed nervously. "Remember I said I was stuck with a book? Well, it's like lightning struck me. The muse visited. Can you believe it? I wrote a draft. A whole novel, literally in a couple of days. Stream of consciousness." I closed my eyes. The lie was so brazen, so monstrous. I felt physically suffocated. "That's amazing, Julian." "Yeah, it's the bomb. I already read a few chapters to my agent. She's freaking out. Says the style is totally different, more mature, deep. But there's a problem, Dad." "What is it?" "The ending. The last 2 chapters aren't there. I kind of lost the thread at the end. The flow dried up." "Could you take a look? You're good with structure. Technically, you're solid. Come over tomorrow, yeah? Help your old son with some editing?" He had stolen the manuscript, but he had stolen the draft. I hadn't finished writing the finale yet. And now he, this marketing genius, was asking me, the author he had just dragged through the mud, to finish writing the book he had stolen from me. "I'll see what I can do," I said. "Super. You're the best. Love you, Dad." He hung up. I slowly placed the phone on the desk. My hands weren't shaking. On the contrary, they felt heavy as stone. This was the point of no return. My son hadn't just insulted me. He had decided to rob me, confident that I was a harmless old man writing trash that no one would ever see. The doorbell rang. That was strange. It was 1 a.m. I didn't get visitors. I walked to the front door and flipped on the porch light. A black Mercedes S-Class with a driver sat in the driveway. On the doorstep stood a man in an impeccable cashmere coat. Elias Thorne, owner of one of the largest publishing houses in New York. The only person on the planet who knew who Victoria Vale was. He looked tired. He held a leather briefcase in his hand. "Bill," he nodded instead of a greeting. His voice was, as always, low and commanding. "We need to talk, and I'm afraid you're going to need something stronger than tea." I opened the door wider. "Come in, Elias." We walked into the study. Elias didn't waste time on small talk. He placed the briefcase on the desk, right where my manuscript had been, and pulled out a tablet. "An hour ago, I got a call from a literary agent," Elias said, looking me straight in the eye. "A certain Melissa Grant. She represents young influencers. She sent me a synopsis and the first 50 pages of a manuscript she called the Discovery of the Decade. She wants an auction. Starting bid, $500,000. He turned the tablet toward me. Text glowed on the screen. I knew every word. I remembered agonizing over the adjectives in the third paragraph, struggling with the rhythm of the dialogue on page 2. The Confession of Silence. Author, Julian Evans. Elias was silent, watching me. He had been my publisher for 30 years. He was my friend. And now, he was a witness to my greatest shame. "It's your text, Bill," he stated. It wasn't a question. I'd recognize Victoria Vale's style anywhere, even if you change genres. The fingerprint remains, the syntax, the metaphors, the depth. Julian couldn't write a single paragraph of this. "He stole it," I said quietly. "Yesterday, from this drawer." Elias sighed heavily and sank into the armchair opposite me. "Melissa says the manuscript is almost done, but the author needs a little time to polish the finale. She's already sent teasers to Vanity Fair and the New Yorker." "Bill, if we don't stop this now, the news will be everywhere by morning. He is selling your soul under his name." I looked at the shelves filled with Victoria Vale's books. Then I shifted my gaze to the empty desk drawer. My whole life I had hidden. I let them think I was nobody, just to keep my peace and ensure their comfort. I had created a monster. I fed his ego with my money, and now he had decided to devour me whole. But Julian had made a mistake. He thought he was fighting a loser father. He didn't know he had declared war on Victoria Vale, and Victoria Vale had been killing off her enemies with cold, twisted ingenuity for 40 years. "Don't stop the auction, Elias," I said, feeling an icy calm spread through me. Elias raised an eyebrow. "What? Let her send it out. Let them bid. Let him hold a press conference." "Bill, do you realize what you're saying? Once he signs the contract—" "He can't sign a contract for a book that has no ending," I interrupted. "He called me, asked me to help write the finale." A slow, predatory smile began to form on Elias's face. He understood. "You want to give him enough rope?" "I don't want to give him just a rope, Elias. I want to build him a scaffold that he will ascend to thunderous applause, thinking it's a throne." I walked to the window. The glass reflected an old man in a knitted cardigan. But the old man's eyes were hard. "He wants to be a brand?" I asked my reflection. "I'll show him what real storytelling is." I turned to the publisher. Elias prepped the lawyers, but for now, silence. We play by his rules. Documents, dates, drafts, we collect everything. And when he climbs to the very peak, we pull the rug. Elias nodded and pulled an expensive fountain pen from his pocket. I love it when you get like this, Bill. This is going to be your best plot yet. I sat at the desk, opened a new file on my laptop, and typed the title. The Confession of Silence. Finale. I will write him an ending, I whispered, but it won't be the one he expects. Ghost of the Pen. Part 2. The Ink and the Receipts. The next morning I entered the lion's den. Julian's apartment in Bushwick smelled of stale vape smoke and expensive unwashed denim. It was 11 in the morning, and he was still in his bathrobe holding a game controller. "Hey, Dad. Thanks for coming," he said, not looking away from the television screen where a digital soldier was reloading a machine gun. "The laptop is on the kitchen island. Just work your magic. I really need to decompress before the auction." I looked at him. My son. The brand. He was about to sell a stolen masterpiece for a 7-figure advance, and he couldn't be bothered to even sit with me while I wrote the ending. I made myself a coffee in a dirty mug and sat at the island. I opened the file. The cursor blinked at the end of Chapter 38, the cliffhanger I had written 6 months ago. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. For 4 hours, the only sounds in the room were the rhythmic clatter of the keyboard and the explosions from the video game. I didn't just write an ending. I wove a trap. In the final monologue of the protagonist, I inserted a sequence of phrases. To the untrained eye, it was just beautiful prose about memory and loss. But the first letter of every third sentence spelled out a specific date and a file number corresponding to a notarized copyright registration I had filed 3 years prior, under the name Victoria Vale. It was a forensic watermark, invisible and indelible. "Done," I said, closing the laptop. Julian paused the game. He didn't read it. He didn't even check the word count. He just grinned. "You're a lifesaver, Dad. Seriously, I'll mention you in the acknowledgments. Something like, 'Thanks to my father for the typos.'" He hit send, firing the manuscript off to Melissa, his agent. 2 days later, the summons came. The meeting was held at the headquarters of Thorne Publishing in Manhattan, a glass corner office on the 45th floor overlooking the empire of the city. Julian wore a suit that was too blue, his hair slicked back. He looked like a shark, or at least like someone who had watched too many movies about sharks. I wore my old beige cardigan. I sat in the corner, the silent, embarrassing father. Melissa, Julian's agent, was vibrating with excitement. "Elias," she said, leaning over the mahogany table, "we have interest from 3 studios for the film rights, but we wanted to give Thorne Publishing the first refusal on the print rights because of the family connection." Elias Thorne sat behind his desk. He was a statue of calm. He didn't look at Melissa. He looked at Julian. "It is a remarkable book, Julian," Elias said softly. "The depth of historical knowledge about 19th century Edinburgh is profound." "I didn't know you were a historian." Julian waved his hand dismissively. "Wikipedia, Elias. And a lot of late nights. I just channeled the vibe, you know." Elias nodded slowly. He opened a folder on his desk. "The auction starts at 500,000, Melissa interjected. Elias held up a hand. "There will be no auction," Julian frowned. "Excuse me? If you can't afford it, just say so." Elias slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It wasn't a contract. It was a forensic linguistic analysis report. This is a comparison of the syntax, vocabulary frequency, and sentence structure of the Confession of Silence against your blog posts. "Julian," Elias said, his voice dropping a few degrees in temperature, "the probability that the person who wrote your blog also wrote this novel is less than 0.1%. Julian laughed a sharp, nervous bark. That's ridiculous. People change styles. I evolved. Elias slid a second document. This is a bank transfer record from 2011. It shows the purchase of the rare reference books used to research the medical procedures described in Chapter 14. They were purchased by a rare book dealer in London and shipped to an address in Connecticut. My address? No. Your father's address? Julian turned to me. His face was losing its color. Dad, tell him you gave me the books. I remained silent. I just watched. And finally, Elias said, placing a heavy-bound manuscript on the table, "This is the original draft of the novel. It is dated and notarized 4 years ago. It is signed by the author." Julian stood up, slamming his hands on the table. "This is bullshit. My father is a failed writer. He writes garbage in a drawer. He's just jealous because I'm about to make it." "You are right about one thing," Elias said, standing up. He towered over the desk. "The author is not Bill Evans. The author is Victoria Vale." The silence that followed sucked the air out of the room. Melissa dropped her pen. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Victoria Vale," Elias continued, his voice ringing with authority, "has sold 30 million copies worldwide. She is the primary revenue source for this publishing house, and she is sitting in that chair right there." He pointed at me. Julian turned slowly. He looked at me as if I had grown a second head. "You," he whispered, "you write romance novels for women." "I write bestsellers, Julian," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and for the first time in years, completely unmasked. "And I don't steal." Elias pressed a button on his intercom. "Security, please escort Mr. Evans and his agent out of the building. The legal team will be in touch regarding the attempted copyright fraud." Julian looked at me, his eyes pleading, searching for the enabler he had known all his life. "Dad, do something." I looked at my watch. I have a train to catch. The fallout at home was not quiet. It was a nuclear detonation. When I walked through the front door that evening, my wife Martha was waiting. Julian had called her. She wasn't crying. She was shaking with rage. "How could you?" she screamed before I could even take off my coat. "He is your son. He finally had a chance. He called me sobbing, Bill. You humiliated him." I walked past her into the living room. "He stole from me, Martha," I said, heading toward the wall painting that concealed the wall safe. "He borrowed an idea," she yelled, following me. "So what? You have dozens of them. You just sit here and scribble your little stories while I try to keep this family together. He needed a win, and you crushed him because you're a jealous, bitter old man." I spun the dial on the safe. Left, right, left. Click. Martha continued, her voice shrill. "And now he's going to be sued? We have to pay for his lawyer. We have to fix this. You need to go back to Elias and tell him you gave Julian permission." I opened the heavy steel door. Inside were not manuscripts, but binders, financial binders. I pulled out the black one and slammed it onto the dining table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Sit down, Martha." She stopped mid-sentence, startled by the tone. She had never heard me speak like that. I opened the binder. "You think I'm a failure?" I asked, flipping to the page with the mortgage payoff. "You think I've been a burden?" I pointed to a figure, $480,000. "That's how much I paid to clear the mortgage on this house in 1998. You thought your aunt left you an inheritance? She died penniless. That was me." I flipped the page. $85,000, Julian's tuition at that private arts college. You thought he got a scholarship? His grades were terrible. I paid full price. Anonymous donor. That was me. I flipped again. $12,000 last month. Julian's rent in Williamsburg. I looked up at her. Her face had gone pale, her mouth slightly open. every vacation, every car, every dinner, every time Julian got into trouble and miraculously got bailed out. It wasn't luck. And it wasn't you pinching pennies. It was Victoria Vale. I closed the binder. I have spent 40 years pretending to be mediocre so you wouldn't feel insecure about my success, and so Julian wouldn't feel pressured by my shadow. And in return, you treated me like furniture. And he treated me like a resource to be mined, Martha whispered. Bill, we didn't know. Ignorance is not an excuse for cruelty, I said. I walked to the bedroom. I had already packed a suitcase earlier that morning. I picked it up. Where are you going? Martha asked, her voice trembling. I took out my phone. I opened the banking app. I'm retiring, I said. I pressed a button. It was a transfer I had set up with my accountant. The main operating account, the one linked to all their credit cards, was now drained. The funds were moved to a private trust in the Cayman Islands. The cards won't work tomorrow, I said, putting the phone in my pocket. You'll have to get jobs, both of you. It will be good for Julian's personal brand, a real struggle narrative. I walked to the front door. Martha stood in the hallway, looking small and suddenly very old. Bill, please, she said. I opened the door. The night air was cool and crisp. I'm not angry, Martha, I said, and I meant it. I felt lighter than I had in decades. The weight of their expectations, their disdain, their needs, it was all gone. I'm just done. I walked out to the waiting Uber. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the window where Julian would eventually return to cry to his mother. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. Where to, sir? The airport, I said, and then wherever the hell I want. As the car pulled away, I watched the house disappear into the darkness. I took a deep breath. For the first time in my life, the story didn't have a pseudonym. It was just mine.